Welcome to the CTA Podcast. Join us as we critically examine the ideological capture of the psychotherapy field. Here we discuss better, common humanity proposals for a fairer society. Our discussions are thought-provoking, and our guests are from diverse backgrounds, bringing unique perspectives to the table. This is the CTA Podcast with your hosts, Carob Marcelle and Christine Seefen.
Welcome, everybody, to the CTA Podcast. We're glad to have you join us today. We're with Carob Marcelle of Be Not Afraid. And we're going to learn a little bit more about what that's all about coming up here shortly. But just a quick highlights of your illustrious career up until now. Miss Bartholomew is a mother and local advocate representing multiple parent groups. She also speaks out regularly on her podcast, which is Be Not Afraid. Highly recommend that everybody take a listen. It's an excellent podcast. As a former foster child who aged out of care and does not subscribe to the victim narrative, Carrie finds herself in the center of this cultural battle. She works tirelessly to defend the virtues of meritocracy and resilience. She's an advocate for all children and believes that the best solutions come when ideas are brought to the table with both reason and compassion. Wow. So, Carob, that is a lot, and we want to dissect all of that. So tell us a little bit more about Be Not Afraid and about the other work that you're doing right now to protect children and to educate parents, essentially, as well.
Sure, yeah. The long/short answer is that when I was 8, I put myself in the foster system. And I've had therapy like my entire life. And so when I hear things like social and emotional learning, I think that's wonderful. It's going to teach resilience. It's going to teach kids how to overcome. And then I started paying attention and I realized that that was not the direction that things were going. And so for me, the first thing I wanted to do was pull my child out, but I also wanted to make as many people as possible aware of the things that are coming for their children, even children. See, SEL started off supposedly geared towards people who've come from extremely traumatic backgrounds, i.e. the foster system, which I'm well informed about. And going into what it is now, it's treating every single child as if they are extremely trauma impacted. And the reason they did this was with COVID, because of the 2 years, they believe that kind of imposed situation has made every child so trauma impacted that they need the same treatment that you would give, say, somebody who's been sexually or physically abused or neglected.
Can I ask a question? I mean, and, I know this is a little bit more personal, so definitely with discretion, on your part, but you said that you actually chose to enter the foster care system at the age of 8. I have actually never met a single person who's ever had that background. And I worked with a lot of foster kids the early parts of my career before I was licensed. So can you tell us just briefly about what drew you into that?
Yeah. My life from about 5 up was kind of movie theater movie of the week type life. My mother was grooming me for prostitution. My stepfather was more attracted to me than he was to my mother, and he comes from like the Bloods and the Crips gang style in California. And unfortunately, a lot of that kind of thing is relatively normal. For me, though, maybe it was faith. I think it was both faith and watching old movies at night, like Nickelodeon, and being able to see that there was something better out there.
Wow.
And yes, I was extremely young, but I would get beaten every single day. I was made to take care of my baby brother, and if he soiled his diaper, as a baby might do, then I would be beaten with a cable cord. So then my mother was the kind of person who made me call her Your Majesty, and she called me slave girl. And so it was a really, really horrific experience. And just the way in which life, I don't know. I mean, for me, it is God. God protected me to a certain level. So all I know is that when it was time to go, I left. And I lived in 18 foster homes in 9 years. And some of them were pleasant and some of them were horrific. And I saw the best and the worst of people. But I learned what true resilience was. And I also learned that I could shape my life. And it didn't matter where I came from, that I had an ability to make out of life what I wanted it to be. And the way that I learned that was from a Hispanic teacher when I was in 6th grade. Before that, I was a pretty angry kid. I think that's pretty reasonable.
Sure.
But when I was in 6th grade, I had a teacher who just said, I see all the potential in the world in you. You can, but it has to be your choice, and how you treat people, and all of these things play into part, but it has to be your choice, and you get to make your choices, and you might not get to make them now. And like in the home that I was in, it was extremely toxic. It was a horrible place to be. But between that teacher, Mr. Garza, and my therapist, Paul Martin, I was able to navigate life and not fall into a lot of the pitfalls. So then I come in and I see SEL, and it is the opposite. I see so much of turning children into victims, having them look for things that are wrong with their lives, when it's like, oh my gosh, I would have given anything to have had the life that most kids have.
Can you just, since, some of our viewers aren't familiar with what some of the acronyms are, but can you share a bit about both SEL and also your experience with it?
Sure. So SEL stands for social and emotional learning. And it's being marketed to parents. And it's literally being said, if you go on to castle.org, you will see how to sell SEL to parents. So it is marketed by giving us language and kind of ideas that everybody would go, that sounds great. Like, we want resilience. We want our kids to be strong. We don't want them to be weak. But then we're telling them, so the way to be resilient and to find purpose in your life is to be on the computer all the time, giving a bunch of information, when the reality is the way to be resilient is to go do something productive. But we don't want to teach the children anymore to do something productive. Instead, what we're teaching them is self-care. Take care of yourself in the most sort of indulgent ways possible. And I believe we're turning kids into narcissists. One of the ways that I overcame the things that I did is by having kind of a servant's heart.
Yes. Be of service.
Wanting to help other people. You don't feel, when I was 18 and I aged out of foster care, it was the same thing that happens to most kids. You get your garbage bag. I was lucky enough that I had made it into a college, but I had no resources. So I was given the food stamp cook book, which I think is much better than what we're given now, which is a card, because the card doesn't make you actually think about it. The food stamp book had a little bit, I don't know if I want to use the word, but I will, kind of a shame effect to it, because you had to wait until you were in the line and then you tore it out and people could see how you were shopping. But that kind of shame effect taught me, it made me look at it and see, do I want this? Do I want this kind of easy way out? Or do I want something more for my life? These things worked. So it's been blowing my mind that we're going backwards into things that don't work. We have 46% of colleges today are doing segregated graduations.
46%?
46%
in the US?
Colleges, yes, in the US are doing segregated graduations. And these are things that they learn through programs like SEL. They learn all of the ways. They'll say intersectionality is all about the ways in which we are alike, but really you're pointing out all the different ways in which you're different and how you can't possibly get along with this group because you are this. And I just find it extremely toxic. But especially because it's used to break broken kids. Like, so they're already somewhat broken, especially since it started out of foster care, right? So it starts with foster care. It starts with extremely fragile kids who need all of the life lessons that therapists used to teach.
Yes.
I loved having a therapist throughout my life.
Yeah.
Today, I would not recommend anyone goes to a therapist.
Yeah. And that is the world we're finding ourselves in. You mentioned something about the way the teachers, Mr. Garza and your therapist, encouraged you to become the best version of yourself, given the structures in place.
Yes.
That was an encouragement that really brought it home to you that there will be structures in place. You cannot suspend those structures. It is up to you to train yourself to build the necessary resilience and skills and competencies to master those structures and the demands being placed upon you. Just today, I saw on a Twitter bio of a psychologist here in one of the universities here in Ireland, where the person says, how about we no longer use the word abuse when we refer to drug abuse? Because we need to keep in mind that drug abuse or drug addiction is a disease and it's completely out of the person's control. So just in that explanation, we remove the locus of control and we set it somewhere else. So we no longer hold people responsible and accountable and have that, convey that confidence in their ability to be free moral agents of their own lives.
This is why they're trying to wipe out the 12-step model. And the 12-step model is all about accountability. The 12-step model is all about owning that you yourself are responsible and that you have to, and it is about being in service and of service to others. And that 12-step model, and I can speak a little bit from experience working in dual diagnosis out here in the US, because of the introduction of the mental health component into treatment, the 12-step model is being put on the back burner and being eradicated in some ways because they're focusing so much on the mental health component and taking the 12th step to be too harsh or to be something that I don't connect with because I don't believe in God, any one of these number of things. So I think you bringing that up, because I was thinking about this as you were talking, Carrie, and the 12-step model concept came right to my mind. And then you picked it up with addiction there, Jaco, in a second later, that's the tie-in, right? That's the connection between all of this.
Well, I think that one of the things that I noticed was the ACEs, the evaluation of the ACEs and your level of how much trauma
what the ACEs
you've been through.
Yeah, explain the ACEs real quick.
Sure. It's the adverse childhood effects. And I
experiences. Yes.
And so the highest number that it used to be was 10, and I'm a 9 on the ACEs, which means that the only thing that I haven't experienced in the whole myriad of things you can experience is someone hasn't been killed in front of me. So, but when I saw this, because I was a foster parent, and when I saw this in training for foster care, it was a complete, well, you have to treat them based on their ACEs scale. And I think that, to me, that was a crutch. To me, that was telling these people that you cannot, like, first off, to walk in and say, well, you've been traumatized, and so these are all the problems that you're going to have in your life.
Yes.
You automatically are like, well, that's a mountain I can't climb over. And so what I'm really concerned about is this idea that they're creating a solution for problems that they've created. So it's because there were things that worked. If you look at anybody's success story, anybody who's worth making a movie about or writing a book about, they have overcome things. But now we don't want to overcome because overcoming is too much pressure.
Mm.
And that's about making our kids as weak as possible. And one of the things that I've noticed a lot recently is the fear that we are putting into children. For us, we have our governor going to our schools, literally telling our kids, trust me to keep you safe. Kids, young people, I'm talking about teenagers, right? They should have this kind of sense of almost foolishness about how immortal they are.
Mm-hmm.
But instead,
Right.
we have kids too afraid to take chances. I was just in Washington, D.C. with my son last month with my family, and we're looking at all of these museums. And all I can think about is, do you know no man would have walked on the moon if he was taught to be afraid?
Yeah.
Right.
Men sitting in solitude in those little, capsules for the longest time, or women. I don't want to be, gender, whatever. But this fear that we're teaching is about breaking our children.
Right.
Like, I would say that we're turning them into narcissists, which we are. But on top of that, narcissists have a strong sense of self. Our children that's being eroded.
Mm.
So sorry, I'm getting
So
very
we
loud
find
and passionate.
no, that's good.
Mm.
We find ourselves in a system where the discourse is one of pampering,
Yes.
and it is sold as compassion, this
Yes.
narcissistic compassion. And it doesn't create resilience or proper self-care within a system with strict enough demands upon you. Instead, it fosters dependency and disempowerment.
Yes. And it's everything that every single foster brother and sister I've ever had has fallen to. So it's not just a matter of using things and trying them out. It's a matter of using the things that break people. And it seems intentionally. How I look at SEL, if anybody's listening and isn't watching, I'm African American or I'm biracial. And what I look at that I find so striking is that there was a lot of work put into breaking down the Black community. The Black community after slavery was very, they had one of the highest literacy rates.
Yes.
They valued faith, all of these things, and family, big time valued their
Yes.
families.
Family values, the nuclear families.
And now, I mean, if you want to know where SEL ultimately takes us, look at the videos of people twerking on cars, burning things down, acting like fools because they can, because they feel quote unquote empowered to do so. And that's where SEL takes us. It takes all of the terrible things that were done in the African American community, and it spreads it out on all of our kids, all of the other children. It destroys relationships. It fosters bigotry, all under some fake line of compassion that people fall for.
Yes.
Because they want to, because it's easy, because the idea of, taking your kids out or being involved with your children's lives are something that they've checked out. And then you go and you look at who supports these programs, who funds these programs. And we're getting Gates and Zuckerberg Chan, the same people who taught the parents to check out are the ones creating the curriculum for the kids.
Let us raise your children for you. That's the key message. We're going to take your children and raise them for you. And the thing that's really sad, I suppose there's a lot of things that are sad, but what stands out to me right now is that school's known to be a microcosm or some sort of microcosm-ish of the world around you. One of the purposes on a psychological level, on a mental health level of school, is that it teaches children a bit about authority, consequence, the reward systems that we have in place. And it's also a place to go. And I spent some time working on this project when I was working at FAIR, kind of comparing what the SEL agenda is, or even the critical social justice agenda is, versus what the agenda is to produce healthy children. And those two things are completely diametrically opposed and the antithesis of each other, in a sense. So you have this idea here that these kids are supposed to go to school to have that experience, to be able to experience perhaps a corrective emotional experience with a good teacher who ends up telling you that you're better than you think you are, because at home maybe you're not getting that. So that's what the intention is supposed to be in order to produce these healthy children. And instead, it's actually taking this microcosm of the world and changing it into a microcosm of a critical social justice world, so that they're sent out to become these narcissistic, terminal narcissism. I love that phrase, Jaco, that you coined, I think, but to go out and become these activists and little social justice warriors. So it is actually still doing what it was intended to do. But what we've done is we've changed the entire fabric of what our society is looking like and what our intentions are. And then by default have changed that school systems and those classrooms to be just that, to be a reflection of what's happening on the outside, rather than a way to build constructive tools in order to get through life, constructive ways to deal with rejection, constructive ways to deal with setbacks and to deal with pain and to deal with all of these things that we all face. So it's a great idea on paper. And again, there's a lot of these great ideas on paper, but in practice is destructive, and then obviously looks intentionally destructive, because the outcomes that we're seeing are so poor in how children are doing after the fact.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that social justice is the greatest injustice that has ever been done to kids, especially because we've got history to look back on. Other places who've embraced communism, because that's what it is. Other places, they didn't have to look back on. I mean, we can click on YouTube right now and watch videos of Mao and Stalin and the Holodomor and all of these different things. We can watch what happened in South Africa. We can watch.
Yes.
But yet here we're doing it. We're just going ahead and doing it. And it's like Yuri Bezmenov said, without a shot. Without a shot, we're giving these children away.
Yes.
And it is such an injustice.
All those theorists and all those political theorists were devout Marxists. And what they did was they just superimposed the formula of Marxism, and they adapted it to, say, the educational system. Even within psychoanalysis, with the early critical theorists, they were also devout Marxists. But their issue was Marxism failed because it was so objectivist. What they meant was Marx only focused on the economy without necessarily focusing on the subjectivity of those who participate in the economy. And what those early critical theorists then wanted to do was they wanted to use the principle of Marxism and superimpose it upon psychoanalysis and see how psychoanalysis can be shaped so as to follow that formulation of Marxism. So within Marx's economic theory, there is surplus production, for instance, where alienation is achieved when a person participates in activity that they really do not want to participate in, number one, and secondly, that they exert themselves beyond what is necessary for them to do. So that is surplus production. So they converted surplus production into psychoanalysis, and they coined surplus repression. So what they're saying now is the system demands of you to repress yourself beyond what is what they call humane. And what they want to do is they want to suspend some of these structures so you can have less repression and more indulgence. And that is on that basis that Herbert Marcuse wrote Eros and Civilization. And the psychoanalytic structure he used as the roadmap to this utopia was perversion, where you suspend excess repression and you indulge in your perverse desires. So that is what they did. Not only the psychoanalysts, but also Freire, Paulo Freire of Brazil, adopting Marxist ideas and adapting it to the educational system.
And I think that the reason that the teachers are embracing this, or the admins are embracing this, is they've gotten into elitism. So they believe that their ideas, I mean, it's colonizing. It's exactly the things that they say that they're against. And this is why we must stand up against, is what they're doing. So these teachers believe that we're just backwoods hicks and couldn't possibly know what's right for our own families. But if we go into the reality of what happens when you give way, I mean, I think we're all similar in age, and there was a show, Sex in the City. Okay, well, when I was in my 20s, that was a big Sex in the City, and we did think that casual experiences were perfectly fine, and that they could actually be fulfilling and fun and a sense of adventure. And everyone that I know who participated in that, myself included, wishes we didn't.
Yes.
You know, I mean, there's just this point where you're like, I was worth more than a one-night stand. But now we're bringing that into the classroom, and that you shouldn't judge it, but you should. There are things in life that you should judge. There are things in life that you should look at and go, okay, this has been tried before, and it's been a really, really bad idea.
Yes.
So it leaves you empty, leaves you suicidal, you know, all of these different things that happen. But we're saying embrace it all, and embrace it all without judgment. You can't. You're getting rid of our human nature to say that we, you know, they're reducing us to animals.
I recently heard someone say, the only system without strains and bars is the sewer.
The sewer.
The only system without strains and bars. And this is what this discourse tells us, that all prohibition is mean, is unfair. And if you're truly compassionate, you will suspend all prohibition. That is toxic empathy. That is narcissistic compassion right there.
So there's a little girl at my church, and she went in yesterday to get a sports bra at Victoria's Secret. And when she went in to get fitted, she looked up, and the person that she was looking at was a man. A man was in to do a 14-year-old sports bra. And she looks up and she goes, no. And her mom said there was just like fear and, yes, disgust. But she's 14 and she shouldn't be put in a situation in Utah.
Wow.
Like,
wow.
This is the sewer. This is putting children into extremely vulnerable positions so that we can pretend that we're empathetic. When behind closed doors, what parent wouldn't be furious with a situation like that?
Yeah.
What responsible parent? I mean, there's a lot of parents who aren't responsible, but
I mean, that's just shocking. I guess nothing should be shocking at this point, but that's just I'm speechless.
Yeah. But you mentioned Utah. So what is the social milieu like in Utah? I'm not from America, as you know, and my association with Utah is the Mormon state. What is it like? Because I would associate Mormons with
conservative values,
conservative, very
right?
committed to family and family values, those traditional values.
You would be right to assume that.
It's what it used to be like.
Okay.
My own theory, I have no proof on this, but my own theory was that when they stood against gay marriage as a church in, I think, 2008, I think people came here with a target that we will destroy the state. So it is extremely progressive. And it's shocking. It is shocking because there are people who on the surface hold on to their values. The kids, they go on track, right? So they dress up as pioneers and they walk through the desert carrying hand carts. And then they come home and a bishop's, which would be like a pastor's wife, might coach them in SEL and empathy. One thing about the LDS faith is that it's very tolerant, and it prides itself on how tolerant it is. But it's kind of strange because it's also taught that the LDS are a peculiar people. And I'm former LDS, and I used to hold on to that. We're a peculiar people. It's okay that I'm more modest than other people, or, you know, whatever else. It's being a peculiar people. It's being kind of set apart. It's nobody wants to be set apart anymore. People want to embrace this. People want to be the most empathetic. People want to be the forefront of all common core. And they're very much embracing social and emotional learning, at least at like our governor. Our governor's wife actually is a huge fan of Tim Schreiber, who is the CEO of Castle. She brings him in twice a year.
Wow.
So so she's a huge fan. But then at the same time, I have secret teachers who are bringing me curriculum and saying, please take a look at this and tell me what you think. So
it's just, the thing is it's so counter, it's counter what even traditional models of trauma treatment are about. You know, when I was at FAIR, you know, they brought us in because they wanted to, you know, they're putting this money toward these trauma-informed schools everywhere. And they wanted all schools to be trauma-informed schools, which meant that it didn't matter whether, you know, you had a group of kids there that were, you know, wasn't like, okay, this is a school for foster kids, so we want everybody to have trauma-informed care, you know, experience and whatever. They're talking about doing this to the general schools. And one of the things about trauma treatment is that it is incredibly individualized to the person, to what they've been through, right, to the child, and to, you know, people that are certified, you know, licensed professionals that know how to deal with trauma, because, you know, there's certain things that you just do and don't do. We won't get into that in this program, but they wanted to extend that to everybody and have all the teachers have some kind of knowledge such that they were qualified, they would become qualified to deal with trauma with children in the classroom. And we spoke against it, and we listed sort of all these pieces of research and documentation that listed why that's a bad thing. Kids tend to also see that this, you know, that these trauma informed, you know, that these kids that are coming in and they're just sharing their trauma in the middle of their group circle every morning are starting to get more attention. So therefore, then kids start to align with that in order to belong. So now you also have the creation of maybe imagined traumatic events, or you know, catastrophized maybe events that weren't maybe considered to have been trauma, but in some way bring some kind of connection and attention into the classroom. So we came out and we said that's why this is not okay, and it goes against the individual. And the narrative is about resilience. The rewriting your own narrative, which is part of that whole trauma treatment, is about rewriting your story and having resilience, giving back, not identifying as a trauma victim or even a trauma survivor, but as a person who, you know, that has this history as part of the quilt fabric of their lives, but they're not defined by it. So everything that it stands for has been flipped on its ear in order to create a trauma-informed school. That's what was happening in Utah, of all places. I mean, we talked with the legislation, and we lost, you know, the case. And we knew we would, but we were trying to reach at least one legislature's ear, at least one person, to be able to hear and say, you know what, maybe we ought to pull back a bit. And it didn't happen.
No, I think it has happened, but
well, that's
one is Utah wants to be seen as the kindest state. So they really play and manipulate kindness and empathy. So those two things really play on, you know, be a peacemaker, never being confrontational, even to the point of sacrificing your kids. And that's the part that's been shocking to me, is that parents will say, I know you're right, but we can't, you know, we want our kids to be kind. We want our kids to be quote unquote lights unto the world. They don't understand that the darkness is seeping in. These kids are trauma bonding.
Yes.
And then they're taking on these things. So like GSA is the Gay and Straight Alliance. Fine. Teaching kids to get along and to accept each other. They changed it from Gay Straight Alliance to the Gender and Sexualities Club. Still GSA, but now it's the Gender and Sexualities Club because so many kids now identify as queer, which then allows them to get texts into school or get texts from schools, apps that tell them to go out and protest. So the kids are genuinely being used through their empathy.
Right.
And they won't say no to it because of the empathy. But there are people who are waking up. There are legislatures who are like, who will send me messages and say, hey, what should we do? What are your thoughts on this? Can you write an op-ed? You know, what can we do in this situation? But Utah's the ideal place because there's also a compliance. There is an obedience to the faith, and our universities, including BYU, are very much captured.
Yes.
I just did an interview with someone and they said there are more pride flags and more BLM fist stuff on our school campus than there are representations of Christ. In a school that's supposed to be set apart and build peculiar people.
Well, that is the naivety of utopia. You're very exposed. You're vulnerable to such infiltration and, not only infiltration but also corruption.
Right.
Because of that naivety. I just wrote down. When we think about people being exonerated from responsibility and accountability, that just leads to, obviously through excessive compassion, that leads to an incestuous relationship between authority and those underneath authority. And that incestuous relationship further leads to perversion and narcissism. People aren't resilient. They don't bounce back from hardships. And like you said, they indulge in this victim narrative where resentment and entitlement prevail.
And I think one of the big things is that those people who have overcome, we're the biggest threat because whatever you throw at us, we're like, we already know what's on the other side. And so what I've noticed is that kids crave that. So I take every opportunity I can to be a mentor to kids. Right now I'm working out at a cherry plant, and there's like 12 kids on my line, and they will ask me questions, everything from faith to history to politics. They'll ask me, while we're just working. They like, one kid will just, he goes home, writes a question, comes home and asks. That is the first thing he does. But the kids crave strength. They crave it. They
and
know what's
answers.
happening to them, which is, it's like living in an abusive relationship. You know that what's happening to you is wrong. And our children know, many of them. And I think that's one of the biggest hopes we have, is that so many are aware of what's happening. They're closet conservatives because their parents would be devastated. And that's just, and whatever you define conservative as, when I say conservative, hardworking, believe in two genders. They have no problem. They're not uncomfortable around people of different races. They don't feel a guilt because they are white or hate somebody because they are white. There's none of that going on. They're just like, they all get along, and they don't understand, nor do they want to attempt to understand what's coming to them. And then the other day I was having lunch with a friend, and the people behind us coincidentally were school counselors, or at least one of them was. And she was talking she was talking rather loudly, so we heard her, but the person who was talking to her appeared to be her mentor and said, your job as a school counselor is to create a garden of new knowledge where it has been barren based on what the parents have not taught these kids. And you
Wow.
just go, so these children are craving. First off, they're being preyed upon. They're being preyed upon, not necessarily in a way to like become lovers with adults or something, but I think that what happens when we live in a sewer is that we want other people to get dirty as well, so that we can feel justified in the fact that we're filthy.
Absolutely.
And I think
We don't want difference.
I think that's what's really happening.
Yeah.
And that's why it's spreading. So what happens, another big thing with the Utah culture is that when people leave the faith, many of them go off the rails and become as, I don't even think pagan is a fair word. They become toxic.
Yeah.
And then they want that. They want to instill that on all those other kids because they feel like that's their freedom. And nobody will judge them if everybody agrees with them.
Yeah. And they encounter representatives of the church when they encounter faithful people.
Yes.
And so they see the church when they see those faithful people, and then they would just like to trash those people.
Yes. Their hatred is palpable.
Right. Yeah.
And to do that, that's what they want to do to our kids. They want to turn our kids, they want to turn your own children in your own home. They want them to hate you and everything you stand for.
With the work you're doing, are you part of a network of parents, of professionals? What strategies do you have? What agendas do you follow to help children remain reality contacted or in contact with reality?
I mean, I'm an autodidact, so I'm
Yes.
self-taught. I wouldn't call myself a professional of any kind.
Okay.
I am a mom. I'm an aunt. And I have a deep, deep faith. So my faith leads me in what I do. So people will say, oh, how can we pay you? How can we further whatever? And I'm like, all I'm trying to do is wake up in the morning and say, use me, God, because we're in a cultural revolution. We are in a war. So use me in whatever way you can to do whatever I can. So I do all sorts of, I say yes. I mean, that's literally what I do. So I go around the state performing Harriet Tubman's story, and you can get people telling that in different ways, but the way I tell it is always as unifying as I can. I have the kids repeat certain parts, and I tell them that, you know, as Harriet, she ran through the night and she stayed with good Black people, free Black people, and good white people. And I tell these stories to the kids in a way so that they don't take on a guilt that isn't theirs.
Yes.
Yes.
I also, I'm with a group called Path Forward Utah. And we're just getting started, but I'll be interviewing Bob Woodson next month. I speak out at the Capitol. I stand up against CRT, DEI, SEL. I run parent groups, just like social media on Facebook. And I show up whenever somebody asks the question. I am there to give them an answer, but mainly I love the kids.
Okay.
Every age. I just love these kids, and I want them to feel truly safe, not fake safe, but actually safe, that they can ask any questions and that I will be honest with them. I will give them the answers, and I will leave them, if possible, with hope. That's what I do.
Yeah. In true spirit of cultural sensitivity, I want to quote a Bible text. If you're a Muslim, I would have possibly quoted something else. But that text in Isaiah that says, "Here I am, send me." I think it is Isaiah 6, if my memory serves me right. That is what that is your position as a person of faith. Here I am, send me. So are you saying that, and I want to ask this question so that people listening could possibly take note, that even though you're not a professional person in the formal sense of the word, you're an informed, self-taught intelligent, resilient, driven person, mother, woman. And because of what you know, and because of the worry, not only for yourself, but also for others around you, you have determined that you are going to do something about this.
Yes.
Right. Yes. And on top of that, I would say that my faith gives me hope. So I had a woman the other day, she's kind of well known, and was very aggressive and toxic, and you have no idea how bad we're failing. It's so terrible. And I thought, I'm fully aware of everything that's going on. I've dug in, I'm very well informed, I know these things. But in the end, I have hope. I believe in the human spirit, but I also believe in God. And so even if this leads me to the worst situation and I end up in prison or I end up dead, in the end, I truly believe in my heart that I know where I'm headed. And my biggest issue with all of this and why I fight this isn't just that we're teaching kids to be weak or ill-informed or follow whatever. It's that they want to take away their faith. That is the biggest, that is the end game here. They want children to be allegiant to the state as God.
Yes.
And so for me, I am a missionary. If you really I'm not a paid missionary, but I am a missionary, and that is what I'm doing, and that's why I do it.
And by implication, then, every person who's worried about this shouldn't wait for the other person to stand up first to do something about this. Wait for the professionals to organize or to mobilize first before they do anything about this.
Yes.
Use what you have within your reach, grassroots, and start forming networks around these issues. Beautiful. That is what has happened in many other areas in the United States, and they're quite successful.
Yes.
When that parental instinct gets activated, it's unstoppable.
The mama bear instinct, they call it.
And let me tell you, the powerful people are scared.
Yes.
Let me tell you, they're scared.
Yes.
So keep going.
I absolutely agree with that.
I think this is been a fantastic, phenomenal conversation and a good place for us to start winding down. But Carob, we want to give you a chance to share with us anything new. I know you mentioned a few things you're a part of, but if there's any new events or anything new that you're doing that people can look out for, or how to even follow you in your work, where should they go?
Sure. Like you said in the beginning, my podcast is Be Not Afraid with Carob Marcelle. That's my first and middle name. And other than that, sometimes I'm on Leslie's podcast. So I sometimes contribute with
Radical
you
Center.
on the Radical Center.
Yes.
And other than that, I mean, I just want people to get involved. Just look up for your parents' groups. Before you decide to write off a parental group like Moms for Liberty, which I'm not a part of, but before you decide to write off a group like that, look into it. See what they're doing. Don't take other people's business. I mean, there's lots of people who say I am quote unquote a bit much. And but I'm not. I'm just a mom and an aunt, a neighbor, and somebody who does not want our children to be part of a cultural revolution.
Yes.
Right. Stunning.
Thank you.
More power to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, such a pleasure. Such a pleasure.